G'day all, it's Colin from PCTLC and thanks for joining me. Today we're having a look at Gparted, the Gnome partition editor. Now the Gparted is one of those little applications that comes along with most of your Linux live desktop environment. So if you download a Linux ISO and you write that to, say, an old-fashioned way DVD, most of the time these days would be USB, and you put your USB in your device and you start it up and you get your live Linux distro desktop environment. 9 times out of 10, I'd have to say, you would have Gparted within that live desktop environment. And more than likely, if you go ahead and install, you'll probably find that most of the time you will probably won't have Gparted after install. It's only there most of the time in the live environment to assist with partition manipulation to help with the install and setting up your partitions if it's needed. So this is Gparted here. This is their website, Gnome Partition Editor. Features: perform actions with partitions such as create or delete, resize or move, check, label, set new UUID, copy and paste. And you can also manipulate file systems such as Btrfs, ext 2, 3 and 4, FAT16 and 32, and all this list here. You can see it. I won't go through the whole lot. I pretty much use Gparted all the time when I'm installing. Especially if I'm installing with Calamari's installer, because it seems to have an ESP issue on some occasions. So let's have a look at Gparted now, just to check some things out here. Live USB, which is this page here. So I've clicked on this link here, and you've got some information there for Gparted, and then you've got the Gparted Live Manual. So it shows you when you boot. Gparted has its own ISO. You can download and just use Gparted itself without using the one in the installer if you wish to use that before you boot your Linux distro. It shows you how to perform that. You use the default settings. It tells you can use different modes by arrowing up and down. And it tells you how to use it here. Figure 3, key map question. Use your language and set the number for the language that you want to use. And then this one here, there's an option. Let's just check that out. There's an option there to continue to start X. So you would choose 0. So let's just check all these pictures out here. That's the boot up screen there. It does say don't touch key map. Choose your language. In this example, it chooses US English number 33, and then down here it says continue to start X, which would give you a GUI environment. And then you can go ahead and do your Gparted stuff. I mainly use the Gparted that comes with the live Linux distro. So one example I'm going to give is we're going to boot this Windows 10 here. And we're going to use a live Ubuntu disk to check out Gparted on that. Ubuntu 2004.1, let's do that one. Now, when you're dual booting on a Virtualbox that's existing, if you want to reboot a different ISO on that, you need to hold the right shift key and press the escape key. And then we get the boot options here. I'll go for boot manager, and I'm going to start Ubuntu there. Actually, I think I selected the wrong one, possibly. Try that again. It's the EFI VBox CD-ROM, that's the one. I think because I've booted Ubuntu before, it recognizes it, but I didn't install it. So there we go. And Ubuntu, let's just try Ubuntu to start with. Now, bearing in mind, this has got Windows 10 installed on this VirtualBox, so it's the same as being on a desktop or a laptop, and you've got Windows 10 running on there, and you've booted USB with your Ubuntu 20.04, and you're checking out the live environment. So we're currently not installing anything. So what we can do is search for Gparted. There it is there. Might take a while to start up because it's checking what's on the installation. Now here we've got this bit here is where you can, this one allows you to select not partitions, but every disk that's installed. Every physical disk is what you will check on here, but there's only one physical disk on here, so you will only see this one. If I had another physical disk, say a 250 gig, then when I click on here, you will see the two different disks available. But on that one disk down here, it shows you all the partitions that are on that disk. So just remember, each physical disk is what's showing here. Now, I think if I was on real hardware, that would probably show me the USB on there, more than likely. And then they break up the partitions, and the colors relate to the colors on here. So that, what would you call that? Turquoise or aqua or something is this one here, which reflects the data partition, the NTFS recovery partition there. The green one is the boot partition for Windows, which is this one here. The black one is representing reserved partition of 16 megabytes, which is that one there. And then this one here, again, the same color as this one, is your Windows partition. And the gray one here, represented here, is an unallocated space. On this one here, you could select that partition there, which is your Windows partition, and you could shrink that using Gparted. So to change this partition here for Windows, you would select the resize and move, and you can physically put a size that you want, or you could adjust the size here like so and just slide it up and down. You can click cancel and do nothing. To be honest, I haven't resized a Windows partition in Gparted. Most of the time I do it with the disk management tool in Windows itself, which is the shrink volume. And that sort of makes sure that you don't go beyond shrinking it too much where Windows could possibly be unusable because you don't have enough room for it to sit in there. So it probably works that out. But I have to think that as long as you don't go beyond that yellow line there, actually it doesn't allow me to go beyond that yellow line. So you probably should be okay. But really, you really need to leave some white space there, I would say, for Windows to function properly. I might be wrong about that. I've never done it this way. I'm just showing you how to use Gparted itself. So that's Gparted in a situation where you've got Windows. And one very important thing you need to know if you're going to do that with Windows, if you are going to use Gparted to shrink your Windows partition, this is very important. You cannot just hit the power key and shut down. You must hold the shift key down and then shut down, because if you just do a normal shutdown from here and click shutdown, Windows 10 now puts itself in a hibernation state. So it looks like it's shut down, but it really isn't shut down. It's in a hibernation state. So if you're shrinking a volume while it's in hibernation state, you might have a lot of trouble and a lot of problems, and you may not even be able to boot. It may cause you quite a few issues and put you beyond, a repair possibly. It's probably fixable, but it's going to give you many headaches. So remember one thing, hold the shift key and hit shutdown. then your Windows will be shut down properly. That is the way you really need to shut your Windows down before you even attempt to shrink the partition with Gparted on a Linux live disk. Now, if you was to go to disk management here and shrink volume within Windows, then so if we right click there and shrink volume, then you can do that. I've got a video on that. I don't know if it's exactly just Windows itself. It might be doing a video where I'm dual booting something else. I cannot remember which video it was, but you can right click shrink volume and then it'll query that, and then you can put the size that you need in here. And as you can see, the total size before shrink is 163, and size of available shrink is here, so that gives you the maximum you can shrink it, and you can go less than that if needed be. So that is 139 gig. So that's how that works, and you can use the maximum size they allow you to there. So you can see there's a discrepancy of about 24 gig or something like that there. So they allow some space for system files and so forth, and applications and all that as well. So that's another way you can do that besides Gparted. So if you want to take anything away from this, 20 odd gig from the leave 25 gig of space on the white line in Gparted. That would be the best thing. But just remember, shutting down, hit that, hold the shift key and click shut down, and that'll shut down Windows properly. On a VM, I don't think it matters. It seems to shut down normally on a VirtualBox, on a virtual machine. But on real hardware, it definitely doesn't. That's why Windows is a lot quicker to start up these days, because it doesn't really shut down. You might think it is, but it's not. So I've got LinuxFX there I was going to be looking at, but I haven't installed it. So let's check this LinuxFX out and see if that has, let's see if that's got Gparted in that. So let's check it out. All right, we've got some pretty fancy effects going on there, but let's just, English next. Start installation. Okay, so it doesn't allow me to do anything else. Let's just leave that box there. Let's check the menu, go to Gparted, and there's Gparted there. So let's check that out. And we have unallocated space in there. So it only has one disk, and that's all there is. So with unallocated space being there, what we need to do is we need to go to Device, or select that first, which it's already selected. Device and create partition table. Now I'm doing a UEFI install, so I'm going to go to GPT, apply that. So what we do is we select the unallocated space. We can go to partition, we can select new there. So that menu there is the same menu as right clicking. So I like to right click, it's a lot quicker and more convenient. And then we give the new size of the partition we want. I'm going to go 512, press enter. So that's 512 megabytes. I'm making it a primary partition. It'll be FAT32 because it's going to be a EFI boot. So I'm going to call that, I'm going to label EFI boot and add that. Then we can right click the unallocated space again, select new. Now new size we want 8192. So for those who are interested, let's get a calculator out. Now if you want a perfect size disk, this has been probably a bit pedantic on my behalf, but I like to do it that way. You want 8 gigs and you want to multiply that by 1024, which is the size of the 24 allows for system space or something. I can't. I'm not the person who can probably give this example, but 8 times 1024 is 8192. So after it creates the partition and for that partition to operate. It's got a certain amount of system files within it. For each gigabyte that you make, you need like 24 megs or something of system files. So after it does all that, it'll be a perfect size of 8 gig, as we'll see here. So that's 8,192. It'll be a primary partition. It'll be a Linux swap, and we'll label that swap and add that. And as you see here, it is exactly 8 gig. And then we have the remaining new again. So in this scenario here, I'm going to use 15 gigs for the operating system. Probably shouldn't have used 8 gig of swap, that's for sure. It's too much, but it doesn't matter. So for the operating system to be installed, I'm going to be 15 times 1024 equals 15,360. So let's do that. 15,360. Enter that. Be a primary partition ext4. Now you can use all these other ones here: XFS, ButterFS, ext2, 3 and 4, FAT16, HFS. Never used any of those or any of these. NTFS you can use, and so forth. But we'll use the typical ext4, label that as root, add that, and then the remaining of that can be made into data. So I can just click add to that, because otherwise I could make that an NTFS. If I'm sharing with a Windows partition, I could make that NTFS, and then both distros could access that data drive. You could do it that way. Let's do that. And you know, we can do anything here. We'll just call that data and add. And then all we need to do now is apply those operations. So let's do that and apply. And then you'll see down the side here, it's got new partition, number 1, 2, 3, and 4. They will change once that's done into dev SDA1, SDA2, SDA3, and SDA4. So that's how that works. And then you got your label here. Now the boot flags here for the EFI boot, you have to right click and go to manage flags. And then you can, if you're booting an EFI, you need the boot. So once you select boot, it should automatically also select ESP, because you're on the GPT partition table. So if we have a look at device, create partition table. If you're on MS-DOS, you can only create 4 primary partitions like this. If you wanted to multi-boot several, if you had a 1 terabyte hard drive and you wanted to make multiple root partitions and just use the same swap, the same data, but make multiple boot partitions about 50 gig each, you must be on GPT, because GPT allows you to go as many as you, I don't know what the maximum is, but you can, 10, 20 different root partitions you can make and install different distros to those partitions. So that's how Gparted works. Now, if you don't like what you did, you can always right click and delete, right click, delete, right click, delete, right click, delete, apply that and apply. Operations completed successfully. Now, let's just say we wanted to create a partition and we make it DOS and apply that. And let's just say we wanted to create more than 4 partitions. Let's just check that out. So we make that 4096, enter that, and we'll call this a primary partition. Now you don't need an EFI partition for this, so all we need is a swap and a root partition. So we'll do our swap first. We'll make that 4 gigs of swap and we'll call it swap. Add that, and then if we wanted to make a root partition, again say new 4096, primary partition ext4, let's just call that root. Add that. So we've got our swap, we've got our root. Let's just say we wanted another root partition, 4096, enter that, it's ext4, root number 2, add, let's go new, 4096, primary partition ext4, root 3. Let's just say we're going to install many partitions to that. Now, if we try and make another partition, I'm assuming it is not possible to create more than 4 primary partitions. There we go. So that's how that works on an MS-DOS. You cannot create more than 4 primary partitions. Now, if we did the same thing, so let's just delete all this. Or we could probably edit and undo, so we can undo all that. We haven't, and there's no option to apply because we undid the actions that we created. Now if we was to do the same thing, let's just do our swap partition first, 4096, primary partition, cancel that. We need partition device, create partition table, make that GPT and apply that. We go new, 4096, enter, primary, let's make that a swap. Actually no, we want that a FAT32, cancel that. Let's try it again, new, we're on EFI, so 512. It's a primary partition, we want that FAT32 and it's going to be EFI boot. Add that. New. 4096, enter. Primary partition, Linux swap. Label that as swap. Add that. Right click again and new. This will be our root partition, so we'll go 8192, make that our root partition. I'm working with small size partitions here, just as examples anyway. It's a primary partition, I want it as ext4, that will be my root. Add that. Let's just say I wanted to dual boot Linux. I could go new, 8192, enter that. It's an ext4, so I don't have to touch anything else, and we'll make that root 2. So that can be my second Linux install. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then let's make a data disk or data partition. New. And as you can see, we've gone beyond 4 partitions because we are under GPT. So it allows us to do that. This is ext4 as well. Let's make that actually just for demonstration purposes. Let's make that NTFS because we want to, let's just say we're dual booting with Windows and then we're going to be dual booting with a couple of other dual boot Linux distros as well. Label that data, it's NTFS, add that and apply. And apply that. So let's move this one over here. Apply that, close that. And as you can see, it's all been changed. So you got your label here, EFI boot, and EFI boot, right click and manage flags and give it the boot ESP. So just click on boot, it'll automatically select ESP because you're in a partition table of GPT. Close that. You don't have to apply. It just automatically adds that, and as you can see here under flags, boot ESP, that's a swap. And you can see that's a MSF data. That's what it's named that as a flag. So that is the power of Gparted. So let's shut this one down. So I'm going to go back to my Windows dual boot. So those examples given there in Gparted were all to do with setting up your Linux distro partitions. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to boot Ubuntu on this one. And what we're going to do here with Windows 10, this was officially a dual boot with Ubuntu originally, and then we did a video on that where Windows 10, once you delete the Ubuntu partition, it doesn't boot. So I showed you how to repair that. So that's why it's got the failed Windows boot repair on that one. So remember what it is. But that's after repairing the boot, you can see that Windows is booting a-okay on this one. So now what we're going to do is go to the boot manager, enter that, and UEFI VBox CD-ROM, and we'll boot Ubuntu. So we're going to try Ubuntu, which will put us into the live environment. So we'll open Gparted. So that is the only disk we have there. So now what we've got here is I'm going to try with this Virtualbox. Most things you do in Virtualbox can simulate real hardware anyway. I've proven that. So what we're going to do is resize. That's on allocated space. So we need to find the one with the most space. So we know that that's a basic data partition, recovery, FAT32, that would be a boot partition. They're all in megabytes. That's a reserved partition, Microsoft reserved, 16 megabytes. So just keep in mind they're all megabytes. So we need to click on the one with gigabytes, which is that one there. And as you can see, that gives us the option to resize and move. If you click on any of these, it probably won't give you the option. Well, it does, sorry. It's only the unallocated space that doesn't give you an option at all. But we need to find the gigabyte one, which will be the basic data partition, and resize and move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize that. So let's have a look at what the sizes are. Free space preceding and the free space following. So that would give me 130 gig. Maybe I only need say 68 gig around there here. So that's for Ubuntu to be installed. So let's use 60 odd gig, that'll do. And we're leaving plenty more space for Windows anyway. So let's resize that. And as you can see, we've got unallocated space of 65 gigabytes. There was a little bit of unallocated space there as well. So what we now can do with that, we need to apply that first, sorry. Apply all operations. And that's completed. Now that was pretty quick. So now we've got some unallocated space to work with. So let's right click that and go new. Now we are on EFI, I'm pretty sure, if we check the system settings. Machine settings. System. You can see enable EFI is there, so we are on EFI, that's fine. So we're going to need a 512, put my numlock on. Okay, so that's not working with numlock on it, with the keypad, I don't know why. So 512 megabytes, it'll be a primary partition, we'll make that FAT32. Label that as EFI boot. So this is the real deal now on a Virtualbox. And then we're going to go new. We'll give that 4 gig of RAM. That's all I'm really looking at here. 4000. No, it doesn't use the keypad. I've got to remember that. 4096. Enter that. This will be a Linux swap. Label that swap. Add that. Then we could go new and we could use the rest of that up for the Linux root partition, and home will be part of the root partition, or you can make a separate data partition as well. If you want to let's go complicated here and make a separate partition. So we'll go, let's see, so 51,200, enter that, primary partition, ext4, and label that as root, add that, and then the remaining would be an NTFS or just a data partition. It can be ext4 if you want it just Linux. Windows doesn't read ext4. There may be some applications out there that can do that, but that's just leave the remaining of that as is. Primary partition. Let's make it an NTFS for demonstration purposes. Label that as data. Let's do that, and let's apply all those operations. Now, as you can see, Windows has its own EFI, and we have our own EFI. So they should never come into contact with each other, which is how I always set it up. Let's apply that. All operations successfully completed. Let's close that. So now what we can do there is, now that we've done that, we've got our, let's just check it out. SDA5 is our boot, EFI boot. Actually, we need to manage flags on that and give it the boot ESP, otherwise it won't boot. So that's very important. We must do that if we're on EFI. Close that. Okay, so we've got SDA5 is our boot partition, SDA6 is our swap, 7 is root, so 5 and 7 is our main ones we want to work with. So we can now close that and install Ubuntu. Now I'm just going to run through this quickly. I'm not going to show everything else. We're just going to skim through this whole thing here and get to the most important bits. Install third party, blah, blah, blah. So because we have set up our own partitions, we don't want to install Ubuntu alongside Windows, because then they will be sharing the boot manager if you select that one. We never ever want to share boot manager with Linux and Windows. Bad idea. That's when updates start messing with the boot between Linux and Windows. So we need to go something else. What we need to do here is we need to identify our Linux partitions, which is the 5, 6, 7, and 8. So what we're interested in is the root, which was 7. So it's not coming up with the flag, with the label of root, but it's SDA 7. As you can see with the size of the disk there, it's 53 megabytes. So let's double click that. We want to use that as ext4. We'll format it, and we're using that as the mount point as root. That's why I labeled it as root. That's what that slash means, is root. Let's click OK on that. You cannot undo this operation. Let's continue that. So now you can see SDA7 has been selected as the mount point of root. Now the other thing we need to do, the device for bootloader installation, that's the important bits. SDA5, that's why it's important to take note. Even if you write it down, swap is just swap. It'll pick up swap, no worries. You don't have to do anything with that as far as this is concerned. It'll know that the swap is there. We know that that's our data partition, NTFS. It's 11 gigs. So it's important to write these things down if you think you're not going to remember it, because there are quite a lot of dev SDA 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes in order anyway. So 5 was our EFI. So we want our device for bootloader to be dev SDA 5, which is our EFI that we made, 512. Reading is 536, but I did make it 512. And so that's what we want there. And now we can install that. So that's install now. Perth for me. Just taking all the defaults here and continue that. And we'll come back once that's complete. Now I did have a crash on the installer, so I've just run through the installer again. Seems to be running fine. I don't know what the error was, so I've just restarted the installer. Did exactly what I did before. It's running fine now. Okay, so that's Ubuntu installed. So we'll restart now and check out our result. And there is our boot screen for Ubuntu. And we've got Windows Boot Manager down here. So let's just check out the Ubuntu install first. And we'll boot into Ubuntu here, or log in anyway. I'm just going to skip all this stuff here. Okay, so let's just check out our file system here and other locations, and we have a data drive here. Let's just check that data drive out, and as you can see it's empty. Create new folder. Let's just call it documents. Open that up, and can we save something in there? Let's open up our text document. Text document created in Ubuntu. Oh, I must have accidentally hit the caps key. Ubuntu, there we go, and let's save into other locations, data and documents. Ubuntu text doc. Let's save that. So back to file manager, other locations, data drive, documents, Ubuntu text doc. There it is there. And as you can see, all seems to be running well. We've got software updates there. We're not interested in that. Let's power off. Let's log into Windows. And as you can see, both operating systems are booting fine without issue. Let's go to our File Explorer in Windows and check out this PC. And as you can see, there's your data drive there, accessible. There's the documents folder I made in Ubuntu, and there's the Ubuntu text document, which we can read with Notepad in Windows. Text document created in Ubuntu. So that's how you share data drives between Windows and Linux. Now let's just check out my own system here. I've got Gparted installed in here, and let's have a look at put in my password before we do anything. So you can see I've got my NVME. That's my 1 terabyte. That's my data drive on this main system here. Then if we click the drop down, I've got my system disk, which is FAT32, my Linux swap, and my ext4, which is my root. So I made the rest of it root, which is what I did when I used the Esnix installer, Easy Arch. And then I've got a 1 terabyte USB hard drive installed, as you can see there. And I've got my another USB 32 gig there as well. So like I said, you can select the disk that you're working with. Now this one here has got all my data on it, and it's also backed up on a different disk as well. So unallocated space 2 gig, which is recommended with an SSD. So I can manipulate whatever I want, but I do not want to touch this. I've got all my personal good information on there. This is my Arch install that you're looking at, the desktop you're looking at now. So it's booting with the EFI 512 megabyte. It's got 8 gigs of swap, and also that's my root partition there. So as you can see, you can select the disk that you want to work with. So if you know you've got a disk there that you can destroy or manipulate or whatever you want to do with it, you can select it here. Very important you know which disk you're selecting. So NVME is an M.2 SSD NVMe, that's the name of them. So they're easily identified. And then you've got SDA, which is I'm running, my SDA is this one here, which I'm running my Virtualbox off of, which is this NUC backup. There's my VM machines there. So we've got the Windows one here somewhere, Windows 7, Windows 10 dual boot. That's the one we're using in the video here that I installed Ubuntu on. So that's my VMs running off the SDA USB in a caddy, in a USB caddy or a dock. And then I've got just a normal little USB key, data, 32 gig there. So that's how that drop-down list works. It doesn't work for partitions. It works for physical disks only. Your partitions are all shown down here when the disk is selected. So that's the partitions there. So this one here, if I wanted to dual boot with this Arch system, I could probably go resize and resize that. I've already got a swap to work with. I'd probably want to make a separate EFI if I did that. So I don't like to have any two distros using the same EFI, but they will both show up on when you boot up. But I'd have to probably turn fast boot off because I've got fast boot on for a quicker boot. So that's a Gparted. Help and about. Gparted 1.1. So the last thing we're going to be looking at here is just the rest of the menu here. We've got refresh devices under the Gparted menu here. If you add another device, you can click refresh devices. And you can also select your devices from here rather than here. So you can do it that way as well. You can quit from here. You can. We've already looked at undo last operations. You can clear all operations, apply all operations, which is the same as this button here. Then you can view device information. So if you click on that, it'll show you the device and the information that's on there. So we've got this one here is a partition table of msdos. That's for that disk there, which is my data partition. That one. So if we have a look at my installed system partition, it's a GPT because it's using the EFI, it's booting on the EFI. So this partition here doesn't need to be a GPT, it's just a normal MS-DOS. So if you're wondering the path of your partition there, it shows you here and it tells you what the partition table is. So MS-DOS, GPT. That one doesn't have a partition table, and that one's an MS-DOS. It's an ADATA USB flash drive. It tells you here the model. USB 3 Lucid port, that's the name of the caddy using that one, and also the size of the disk there as well. You can also view pending operations. It shows you down here, which I do not have any pending operations. And then file system support. Gives you a list of the file system support there. I have to be honest, it's the first time I've looked at that. Haven't really used that one before. And we can close the device information as well. And then the rest is what we've already used in creating the partitions earlier in the video. And as you will see on their homepage here, stable release, Gparted 1.1.0. I don't know what this live one is. Maybe that's, I'm not sure what that is, to be honest. So that was Gparted, a very good hard drive and partition assistant that can help you organize your Linux partitions when needed, unless if you don't need Gparted, then obviously you're going to do it within the installer itself. Some things are not complicated and they don't require Gparted to be used. It's just a simple click. You got a whole disk, just install, do a direct install straight out, no problem. You don't need to do anything because the installer will do it all for you on a simple install. So that was Gparted. And the basics of how to use Gparted. There's a lot more involved in that. I've just stuck to the basics on this video because I only just show you what my experiences are and what I know and my knowledge. So I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you found it interesting and informative, and thanks for watching.